Before we start, I just want to get a show of hands from you in the audience. The motion is a liberal arts education is not the solution to the jobs crisis. How many of you would vote in favour of that motion? Can you raise your hands, please? So, a liberal arts education is not the solution to the jobs crisis.
This is the right-wing position.
Okay, and then all those against the motion. So I'm saying we're roughly 2/3 against the motion, a third in favour of the motion. Do you agree with that, debaters?
You'd have to vote again.
We've got the head start, right?
Yeah.
I think you guys have a 2/3, a third. Okay, so we're going to start first of all with the first speaker in favour of the motion. Who is that? Andy, you're going to go first. So you have 4 minutes starting from now.
All right.
Here, go here.
From you?
And the clock is down there, so
Here you go.
I'm going to hold you brutally to.
Okay, well then I'll get started. Thank you, Matthew, and thank you to The Economist for putting together a great event today. It is an honor to be part of it. It's an honor to have my colleagues here on the panel. Like a lot of you, I suspect, I'm not somebody who easily takes shots at the liberal arts. I'm actually a product of a liberal education, and I believe strongly in its value over a lifetime. And I'm not sure that I'd feel very comfortable taking the position in the debate that liberal arts education has a little value. But luckily, this debate proposition doesn't ask me to do that. We're not debating the value of the liberal arts. We are debating whether a liberal arts degree is the solution to the jobs crisis. The jobs crisis. A crisis is defined as a time of great struggle or conflict in which a difficult decision must be made. It is immediate. It is short term. A crisis demands a solution now, not over a period of decades. And we do have a jobs crisis right now among those who are just graduated from college. 45% of graduates are underemployed, recent graduates. They're working in jobs for which their degrees are not essential, and many can't find a job at all. Employers say there's a reason for that. Recent grads are not ready for the workforce. Unlike a few years ago, the crisis is less that there aren't enough jobs, and more that employers say they can't find anyone with the technical competence to fill the jobs that they have. Now, more than 2/3 of all employers are saying a liberal arts degree is not primarily what they're looking for, and the education marketplace has been responding to the demands of employers for skills. Community colleges are returning to their vocational roots. Coding and computer boot camps, like our own Dev Boot Camp, are exploding with graduates more than doubling. Enrollment trends across institutions are showing a sharp movement towards more career-focused majors and programs. And the wage gap between STEM degree holders and the liberal arts grads keeps widening. In other words, the market is telling us precisely what this debate's proposition tells us. Whether the value of a liberal arts education, whatever the value of a liberal arts education may be to society or happiness or fulfillment or the full arc of one's career, it is not the solution to the current crisis in which students are graduating and not getting jobs. Those who are getting jobs are far more likely to be those who have practical educations. The liberal arts majors, sad to say, are far more likely to be unemployed and living in their parents' bedrooms or basements or wherever. Not wherever, it can get worse.
Depends how liberal, I suppose, the arts are. But anyway.
So
1 minute to go, Andy.
Universities, employers, and students are all responding to the job crisis by moving towards the practical education that offers skills that employers say they want. These students know they can deepen their understanding of history, philosophy, and the arts over the course of their lifetimes, but for now they need jobs, and for that they need practical skills. When a manager in my company comes into my office and says she needs to hire a data analyst, I don't advise her to go out and find a Shakespeare major. When my friend's daughter is looking for a job, I don't suggest she sign up for an art history class. By all means, read Shakespeare and visit museums. But right now, they have a job crisis, and the solution is acquiring the specific skills that are required for a job. That's true for individuals, it's true for companies, and it's true for the economy as a whole. The solution to a jobs crisis is practical education, not the liberal arts.
Well, big round of applause for Andy, who actually kept within the 4 minutes. Excellent. We're going to go with, who's the first rebuttal? So, Linda, you have 4 minutes starting from now.
Thank you. In May of 1780, while away in France, John Adams wrote to his wife, Abigail, expressing his hopes for the progress of what he called American experiment. I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy, he said. My sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, naval architecture, navigation, commerce, and agriculture, in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, tapestry, and porcelain, unquote. We all in this room can agree on several facts. The great American experiment is indeed a great experiment. There is beauty and rich history in a liberal arts education. And U.S. higher education is a testament to that beauty and to that rich history. There are tens and hundreds and thousands of people who flock here each decade, each year, each month, each day to enjoy and engage in our rich liberal arts tradition. We cannot, however, rest on our laurels, very clearly. So something has to give and institutions have to change. Having spent a long time in higher education, all institutions change slowly. We are adapting, we are moving, but we're honoring our rich traditions. What is a liberal education? A liberal education is wide and varied. It is offered at liberal arts colleges. It's offered at great institutions like Harvard University and Princeton University. It's offered in measure at places like the Wharton School and MIT. At the Wharton School, 1/3 of core curriculum for Wharton undergraduates has to be in the social sciences. A liberal arts education is a big name for a lot of things which are very different. Some facts. Employers and graduate schools want flexible, adaptable minds that are trained in rigorous critical thinking. And career life is not a straight path. You need to be prepared not just for your first job, but for your fourth and your fifth jobs. The liberal arts model prepares students to be flexible and adaptable. It prepares them to write persuasively, to read critically, and to study disciplines that engage with history and active thinking. Liberal arts college students who engage in liberal arts study, two different cohorts, they enjoy and learn their passion. Happy, productive workers are workers who are more successful. There's an efficiency wage model that some of us in the room know of. There is organizational theory in support of that. There's other facts at hand. 1/3 of all Fortune 500 CEOs have liberal arts degrees. The strongest argument, perhaps, is an argument for higher education that talks about mobility. A recent study by researchers at the Federal Reserve actually just corresponds with all of the studies in this area. Households in the poorest 1/5 of income distribution are 6 times more likely to rise to the top 1/5 if they graduate from a college with a liberal arts curriculum. The liberal arts is a fine tradition and one that we should honor, maintain, adapt, and grow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, straight on with Elliot Macy. Well, let's reset the clock and then we can go. You have 4 minutes starting from now.
I'm a graduate of liberal arts college. I served for 14 years on the board of Skidmore College. I left in May, and I assume they're going to confiscate my wood chair after this one goes online. My dilemma is that I spend my life working with the heads, chief learning officers of major corporations. We have 230 corporations in our consortium, from IBM, from American Express, Google, Emirates Airlines, Walmart, and the like. They would define our problem right now as the Rosie the Riveter problem. Rosie the Riveter. In World War II, when the men went off to war, we needed people to make the tanks, to fly the airplanes, and there wasn't the ability to send them off to a traditional riveting school. In the end, what we needed to do is think through a process of how were we going to rapidly build out a skill set. The market demanded it. And there was a shift to more on-the-job training, more peer training. In the end, the women during World War II built the best airplanes, built them faster, the lowest failure rate, and when the men came back, they by and large were all fired, and we did away with the learning process that went into it. I believe our problem is not liberal arts. I love liberal arts. I love it. But I'm not interested in hiring the graduate of a liberal arts institution because they went to a liberal arts institution. Particularly if along their way their parents convinced them that maybe getting a BA in business from a liberal arts institution will make you more hireable. The dilemma is when they come to interview with us, they don't know how to code, they don't know how to negotiate, they've never managed something. They don't have any pragmatic skills. They don't graduate with certifications. And when I was on the board of Skidmore, I tried to get our faculty to say, in addition to liberal arts, let's get them certified to make them hireable. And they said, that's not our job. That's not our job. And my problem is that the kids of wealth, the kids of privilege, their parents will create the remainder piece of that. But we as a society, if we believe in upskilling, if we believe in opportunity, we need to look at how do we take the very best of the liberal arts curriculum, courses, faculty, and the like, but weave it together so that our students, whether they graduate or whether we want them to get hired 1 year into the program, can compete internationally. I just got back from Taiwan, from Korea, from Japan, and I will tell you, the barriers are down. The barriers are down. The access to information, knowledge, and the like. But in each of those countries, we, the US, are competing with people who are more targeted, more competency-based, who are working more towards how they become globally hireable. I would actually argue that what we can do in liberal arts is take that core curriculum, but run it through a very different funnel that is project-based, that is experiential-based, that has failure built into it. I served on the National Board for FIRST Robotics. Nothing was better than taking some high school kids of different dimensions and having them design in 6 weeks a robot. Ironically, in the process, they needed to learn philosophy, logic. They did music for a song and a variety of other elements. We have a Rosie the Riveter problem. Our dilemma is that our wonderfully expensive, parentally subsidized and endowment-enhanced institution is not creating the workforce that America needs to compete. And the interesting thing, if we don't do it, we'll go elsewhere to find that talent.
Thank you. Okay, and now someone more recently into the workforce than the other three. We have Dale Stevens, who's the founder of Uncollege, to speak for 4 minutes, starting now.
You may wonder why I'm here, and admittedly I have a much less academic background than my colleague. And I spend most of my time talking about how higher education is overpriced and frequently underdelivers. But I come from a tradition of a broad education. And in my own experience, the most valuable way to learn is by becoming a really good and effective learner. In theory, that's what a liberal education allows you to do. You learn how to think critically, how to make arguments, how to engage in the world. And there are certainly ways in which the liberal arts needs to change, and I think that we can do a much better job of explicitly teaching some of those skills so that students come out of a liberal education with an understanding of how to negotiate, communicate, present themselves, interact with the world. But there's still a very important piece of taking the time to understand who you are, how you learn, and what you want to do. I live in San Francisco. I hang out with all the people who run things like Dev Bootcamp, and I love Dev Bootcamp. I think it's a great solution, but it's not for 18-year-olds. The average age of someone who goes through a coding bootcamp is in their late 20s. They're doing it post-undergraduate. And the way we think about what we do in that world, we run a gap year program that helps people understand who they are and how they learn. And we think that the combination of that program plus a Dev Bootcamp or a General Assembly or any of these hard skill training bootcamps, plus maybe a third program that's an on-ramp to employment, when you start to put those two or three things together, you start to create an alternative pathway. But any one of those programs by themselves is certainly not a replacement for a full liberal arts broad education. I think the real jobs crisis is not a crisis that we can address right this second in the way that Andy described. It's not a question of finding the next 10 or 100,000 computer engineers. I think the real jobs crisis is what happens in 10 years when robots take our jobs. We know that about 20% of the US economy is employed in transportation. We know that self-driving cars are here. Tesla just released an update to make 140,000 of their cars self-driving next week. I think the real crisis is what happens and what do we do as a society politically when 20% of the US workforce is out of a job, is probably very angry, and doesn't know what else to do. In that scenario, I think the best way to prepare those people is to help them get a liberal education, to help them understand how to become productive members of society, to create culture and art and music, and do something meaningful in a world where the jobs that they have been trained to do have suddenly gone away. Self-driving cars is just the first piece. There are many other jobs that will be replaced, and I realize that perhaps in New York this argument is a little bit left field, but this is something that people really cogently think about in San Francisco and are actively trying to replace their jobs all the time.
You got 1 minute.
Who here thinks their job will be replaced by a robot? No one? No one? All right, one person. And you know, I think it's not a question that we want to think about, but I recognize that even what I do could eventually be replaced by a robot. And in order to create a society of people who are educated, who want to engage, it's incredibly important to make the time to gain a broad liberal education. Whether it's inside of an institution or outside of it, you can learn to ask the right questions and become broadly educated.
Thank you very much. So we now have each side will have 2 minutes to respond to what they've heard and to develop their arguments any further, and they can share that 2 minutes between them. I'm going to start the clock. Now. Go.
You know, Linda started off this, her talk with a powerful quote from John Adams from 1781, and I love that quote. But I think we have to remember that in 1781, less than 1% of the men in America were attending college. I say men because almost none of the women in America were attending college. And so there was an aspiration to get to a place where eventually men could achieve a liberal arts education. But of course, the other 99% and the women who were working, if you were a blacksmith, you were on the job training. If you were a farmer, it was on the job training. If you were a seaman, on the job training. Practical education has been at the core of the American education system since our country began. It really is an aberration over the last couple of generations that anybody has thought about a liberal arts education as being mainstream. And I would say to Dale, you talk about the jobs crisis being that in 10 years, jobs will be replaced by robots. I say that's a jobs issue. A jobs crisis is a person who needs a job, has a family to feed, and needs to get a job now. And that's really what we're talking about in this debate.
Yeah. And I think, once again, I think we need to distinguish between top-tier institutions, you are at one of them, in which all of the other elements in which liberal arts gets enhanced, gets extended. My challenge is that if you're a theater major, I produce some Broadway shows, Allegiance is opening soon, okay? That is a liberal arts in which it's pragmatically linked to a job afterwards. The dilemma is that a lot of our students who go into philosophy, who go into foreign language, get wonderful underlying skills, but my experience is that the faculty and the curriculum don't link them back to real job opportunities, and that's part of our crisis.
Time up. Great. And then to the against side, you have 2 minutes starting from now.
So you raised some really good points. Clearly, the evidence shows that the real issue is somewhat of a supply glut of college graduates. And the college graduates who go to the best institutions, no matter what they major in, are likely to succeed. So the question is it human capital or is it signaling? What is it about these kids that gets them the jobs? Part of it is probably is both. What do we do about it? And what does it imply about what we're teaching and what we're learning? institutions need to evolve and to change. Barnard College just went through a total revision of its curriculum. We've introduced a technology and digital requirement of all our young women who are studying at the university. So it's a time to rethink the model. It's a time for us to engage with the general phenomena, which is a growth in the number of college-educated individuals, and to rethink, in some ways, what it means to go to college today.
I think it's really easy to quantitatively assess the success of a college graduate in terms of employment outcomes because you can measure their salary. But it's really important to recall that income is not the only way to measure success. And studies show that people who go to college and get a liberal education are more likely to be married, be satisfied with their friend group, to have satisfaction in their lives. And those broad set of criteria that will lead to a happy, productive society are admittedly not things that you can measure with a dollar amount, but are incredibly important. And history has shown that countries that invest in education are more productive over the course of their histories.
And just one thing, the jobs crisis, I'm not really sure what the jobs crisis is. I saw the term liberal arts and I focused on that so hard and deep because I had to, it's in my blood. But what is a jobs crisis? Our unemployment rate is relatively low. The new measure from the BLS on underemployment is pretty low.
Time up.
Thank you.
So we've had some very strong arguments, I think, on both sides.
We're now going to switch.
And the robot, yeah, we're going to bring in some robots to replace the debaters in a moment and see how they get on. But I'd like to throw it open to you now. Happy if you want to ask a question, ask a question. They can respond. If you want to argue with somebody, keep it brief, but make it heated. Who'd like a lady down the front here? Who I know from a previous Economist debates is a very feisty debater herself.
Thank you. Recently, Japanese Prime Minister asked the universities to be more results-oriented. And the Education Minister of Japan actually asked universities to do away with humanities and liberal arts courses. And some 24 universities did follow. Are you saying that the smart Japanese leaders suddenly somehow become less smart?
Yes.
Who's coming in next? Go on. Who wants to join the argument next? Surely we only have one. Come on, there we are. A gentleman over there and another one over there. Oh, there's a microphone coming to you.
Other side.
Kaskusulas from Louisiana State University. I wonder, we have for and against. But is it really for and against, or is it the blend of the both? Okay? Mm-hmm. Can we actually sort of compromise and agree that both are important?
Mm-hmm. Well, not in an Oxford-style debate.
I think back.
But it is. But I would argue, to leverage his question as support of our position here, that that's what's the problem with liberal arts is the absence of the blend. It is not because philosophy and language and all of the liberal arts are inferior. They are incredible. The dilemma at the end of the day is in most, not all top tier, but in most schools, they are without context, they are without credentialing, and they are without job credibility. We're not saying flush out the curriculum. We're saying weave in a blend, and ladies and gentlemen, in a capitalist society, weave it in part mapped to the reality of what the job market, employers, and the larger economy needs in that sense.
Well, the beauty of the liberal arts is exactly the blend.
Right.
It's the exposure across the spectrum. It's the deep dive in the discipline. Liberal arts colleges offer computer science. Good computer science. Liberal arts colleges offer STEM research. At Barnard College, any woman who wants to work in the summer can work in a lab with a research mentor, either at Barnard, at Columbia, at MIT, at Harvard, at Presbyterian Hospital. She's fully funded to do research and go on in her career and work closely with faculty.
Okay,
Lots of good reasons.
We have someone over there in the third row. There's a mic coming to you behind you.
So I think my point maybe has already been made, but I'll try to add something quick and pithy to it. It is both. And why can't you have a well-rounded liberal arts education and project-based learning? Why can't you have liberal arts education and have it mapped to specific competencies? I mean, there are schools.
But is that going to solve the jobs crisis? And I want you to put it in that framework.
If I don't see why not. If it's mapped to competencies, if there's conversation between universities and employers, I'm at Academic Impressions. We conducted a survey of over 300 nonprofit colleges and universities in 2013, asking about how they approached or had recently approached general education reform or revision of the core curriculum. And of the over 300 institutions, 2 of them drew input from employers as some part of that process. And we weren't asking if employers had a seat at the table or anything like that. The revision of the core curriculum is a faculty and academic affairs responsibility. But what we wanted to know is, did you talk to employers? Was there an employer advisory committee? Did you talk to alumni? Was there any conversation with enrollment management? And in the vast majority of cases, the answer was it was just a small group of faculty that handled it. So what's needed is less insularity and more conversation across this aisle, because it's not an either or.
So is less insularity with regard to employers inimical to a liberal arts education?
I think the fact that I have colleges and universities reaching out to me, and the organization that I run is called Uncollege, goes to show that they're willing to work and they want to change their curriculum.
What do you think, Andy?
Well, I hate to be overly precise about it, but the proposition is that a liberal arts degree is the solution to the jobs crisis. And what people are trying to iterate towards is, well, liberal arts, if you have a blend of practical education. And I think if you believe that it's a blend, what you would say is you actually support the proposition that a liberal arts education alone is not the solution to the jobs crisis. So I would say, yes, you're absolutely right. A blend is the appropriate response. But in terms of, as I understand an Oxford-style debate, and this is the first time I've either been in one or seen one.
You're doing very well. You're doing very well.
It would seem to me that you've got to decide on one side or the other of the proposition. And on that, I think most people are saying, gosh, if it's our kid, we don't really want a purely liberal arts education. We really want something that leads kids to have an employable set of skills as well.
I think you're a natural for the Oxford-style debate, Andy. But we have a guy someone down the front here.
So actually, in 2013, Hart and Associates did a survey of business leaders that actually suggested that out of 300, about 80% said that a liberal arts education is something that they favor in their employees. So in fact, if business leaders come up with that kind of, so that's one thing. And I want to get back to a point that was made, and it won't solve the job crisis or whatever the crisis is, but the point that was made about, an education is and has to be flexible. And I think we're talking about this creative society. People need to be able to develop in different directions. And I think some of the skills that come out of a liberal arts education favor that. And since you are at Barnard, I have a great quote that came from, I don't know the first name, but Janet Shapiro, was it, who said, you want your mind to be an interesting place to be for the rest of your life, and a liberal arts education does that for you.
Well, that may be. I think what we want to do is to really focus on the jobs crisis here. So I'd like to get some comments, about this jobs crisis. Is it the robots? Is it Rosie the Riveter? We've got someone over here who'd like to... Is this on the jobs crisis? Yes.
I would just like to say that I think in some ways the liberal arts curriculum has kind of lost its way. And I know it varies a lot across and it's in this way. Most of the world has employees and people who can speak 2, 3, and 4 languages. And we don't find that to be common in the United States. So that, to me, would be the liberal arts preparing students for the global economy.
And I would even argue more in the sense of a lot of those corporations want people with a liberal arts background. But when the resume comes in, what they look for is they sort first, is it a top tier college? If it's Columbia, if it's Barnard and the like, they like it almost no matter what that curriculum was. What we're saying is how do we map to harder competencies to companies that are global, as you said, multi-language? How do we really get at an element? And I think this is one of what we have to redesign. Our faculty do not see as part of their responsibility significant mapping of their students' education to the marketplace. They either outsource it to a career office, but many of them are not spending time in the workplace and are not significantly oriented to it. And ladies and gentlemen, at some point, paying $200,000 for a 4-year degree, parents may say there might be an alternative to that. It's a lot of money to spend to have your kid, in many cases, end up on that couch.
Okay, Linda, you want to come back in?
Our institutions map.
Yeah.
Our administrators map, our trustees map, and it's a good administrator's responsibility to teach faculty to map.
Right.
And they're moving in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a question here.
One element of the jobs crisis we're not addressing is the crisis around millennials, and that they're a different type of learner. They're also a different type of worker, and our organizations, who are the employers, don't actually know how to work with them. And so if you think about what we really need in millennials, because they like to change so much and they're interested in kind of badging up skills, is much more about the bones and the strong infrastructure that perhaps a liberal arts education might provide, because we want them to be a master learner who can not just learn, but also unlearn and relearn, because they're going to have like 40 different careers. And so if you focus on a specific skill or technical training, then you're going to have someone who's trained in that, but they're not with the new mindset of how the millennials work. I just don't know how that would possibly address the jobs crisis that really we're facing in the future.
The millennial.
As a millennial, I feel qualified to answer this question. I in fact did a consulting gig for Intel in which I was billed as the resident millennial for a friend's agency. I'm not making this up. But yes, I agree, absolutely. The program that we run specifically teaches those skills. And I think that those are the specific skills that you learn in a good liberal education. You learn how to articulate your feelings, how to work in teams, how to collaborate. Liberal arts colleges are teaching design thinking and these new competencies that are incredibly important that employers are looking for as they hire out their next workforce.
You want to talk about millennials? Have you met any?
Well, let me. As a 65-year-old, I mean, I actually think one of the issues.
We're talking about this millennial.
Yeah, no, but one of the issues. Yeah, I know. One of the issues of the millennial is that they also respond to deep competition. They are in a gamified environment. They respond to deep simulation. If I go off to learn how to fly a plane or to drive a submarine, or even if I'm making a pot, there's a lot of failure built. I fail my way to success, as Paul G. would talk about. My dilemma is that I see an awful lot of kids at Skidmore and other colleges that are passing without ever having to be pushed to the point where they fail their way through that success. Because to be a continuous learner, that kid drops out of a video game if it's too easy. They want to be deeply challenged by that. And I actually think we can reform, we can transform liberal arts, and we can transform higher education to have a higher degree of competition and of pragmatic challenge built in.
Very quickly then.
Yeah.
Competition is great, but we have plenty of competition in the millennials. We need teamwork. Liberal arts colleges teach teamwork.
Over there.
So I would argue.
You're on, yeah.
I'd argue that we're focusing our lens a little bit on the wrong part of the population. If we're talking about the job crisis among millennials or among people who recently graduated from college and whether they're employable immediately, they don't actually end up being in a crisis, right? If you look at it from the job seeker's point of view, it's a 55-year-old man who never got a college degree in the first place, who's been dropped out of the workforce, and who's now, doesn't have any ability to get back in. And so what does a liberal arts university education offer to that person? That's where the crisis really is.
What do you think, Dale?
I think we need basic income in this country for everyone to have the ability to pursue what they care about. And I think that if we're going to move to a place where people are really going to be able to pursue a career of any kind, we're going to need to have basic income.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point that when when you talk about that 55-year-old man, you are not going to suggest to that person that the solution to his individual job crisis is to go out and get a 4-year liberal arts degree. That seems like a very unusual reaction for a 55-year-old to take.
And do you think that's where the crisis is, the jobs crisis, or is it the millennial that's going to be out of work because of a robot in 10 years' time?
I think that I think that the primary crisis that we've been talking about has been of recent grads. But one other sort of framing comment I would make is that we all think of sort of ourselves, the people that we socialize with, our own children. Well, the reality is that's a very small segment of the population. That's the John Adams segment of the population. Most people are not having 40 different careers over the course of time. They're getting a job after a job, and what they need to do is not demonstrate their understanding of Nietzsche, but rather to understand that they know how to perform the next job and get it.
Great, with someone over there.
Yeah, I can't believe this, but an Economist conference has turned me into a Bernie Sanders supporter. And that's because we have left, our problem is not liberal arts, but we've left so many kids behind. Mm-hmm. And trust me, you send kids who have to work hard for their education and don't have this sense of entitlement to a 4-year public university, and then when they're 55 years old and they find themselves in trouble, they have a 4-year liberal arts education to fall back on and build on top of.
Any reactions to that?
I think one of the enormous challenges we also have is upskilling. You know, we have high employment, but if you go to talk to whether it be Hilton or any of the major employers, we have an awful lot of people now in frontline jobs who, by the way, graduated with 4-year degrees, who are not going anywhere, And we've got a significant frontline need to upskill folks. Now, bless their heart, I'm not going to try to upskill that person by sending them back for a 4-year degree. I'm going to map it to what are the jobs literally in their locale that they have an opportunity to get next to. And so our view is not a demolition of liberal arts per se. We're just saying that for the robust marketplace economy that's coming, we cannot rely fully or even significantly on our traditional 4-year college institutions.
Linda, what have you got for the 55-year-olds?
The best predictor of labor market success is past labor market success. Breaking that cycle is really difficult. Something fundamental has to change in our workforce that creates value to the 55-year-old who has experience.
And is that fundamental something, the liberal arts education?
Absolutely, but not exclusively.
Can I just add one? I just want to add one more point here, though. That there's a difference between an issue and a crisis. That is, if I'm, every year I change the battery on my smoke detector. Periodically, I make sure that the wiring is okay. That's what prevents a fire. But if I have a fire, I don't change the battery in my smoke detector. I've got a crisis that I've got to deal with right now. So, if this debate were about over the long term, what is the best approach for the American economy, I would say a liberal arts education is important. But if we talk about a crisis, how do we get people into jobs now? The most immediate path is not a lengthy liberal arts degree.
Okay, last question from the audience here.
After the initial financial crisis in 2008, Larry Summers told the Harvard student body, your job is not to go out and get a job, it's to create a job. If you look at the United States today, 70% of new job creation is in companies under 50 employees, and quite a number of those are under 20 employees. So what type of education favors that environment going forward?
Dale, should people drop out of college and start a company?
Absolutely. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing it as an 18-year-old. It's really hard and can be very lonely sometimes. But the kinds of skills that you learn...
This is what you did, yeah?
It's what I did.
Thanks to Peter Thiel.
I think the only thing that I'm good at is that I'm a really good learner. I'm really good at taking things that I've never done before and accomplishing them. And those are the kinds of skills that you learn in a liberal arts environment. You don't have to gain those skills in a college. But gaining a liberal education that allows you to take hard problems, break them into pieces, and solve them is what's critically important.
Any response to the question here?
Yeah, I mean, look, the most, in addition to Dale, some of the most creative minds in our economy, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, did not get a liberal arts education, but they, at least a formal liberal arts education, they all read a lot, they all think a lot, but it wasn't a degree that led them there. And I would include you in there, Dale.
Great. Well, I think we've had a really lively back and forth there. Big round of applause to you, the audience. So we now come to the closing remarks. Again, 4 minutes shared between the two of you to sum up, react, and make your closing pitch
So
to this.
2 each, 2 minutes each.
Well, however you want to divide the 4 minutes up. Your pitch to convince this skeptical audience that you're right about the motion, and then 4 minutes final rebuttal, and then we'll go to the vote, and then to a drink.
I start by saying some of my best friends are liberal arts colleges. And I actually think from a learning point of view, liberal arts courses and interaction with liberal arts faculty and engagement in liberal arts projects are key. But ladies and gentlemen, Rosie the Riveter was a crisis. And what we did is we decided we need to break the mold. We need to break the mold. Literally next week I have 2,000 learning people coming to my conference in Orlando. Who are my two speakers? Sal Khan and Steve Wozniak. Why? Because corporate America needs to look at learning that isn't necessarily course-based, innovation that isn't necessarily the derivative of a traditional degree, and I believe that what is the opportunity, and I actually think leadership will come from great, great leaders in great liberal arts and non-liberal arts colleges, is we need to create, how do we create a learning society in the United States that is effectively mapped to continual job market element? I would end this. I am a proud Boy Scout. I got recently as an award from them a copy of all the badges I had growing up. My mother threw them out, and I got all my old Scout badges. I want to ask myself, of the person who's graduating college, what are the badges? What are the badges we want them to have that will help them get a job, support their family, and operate competitive globally? I think some of it may be what the liberal arts would do, but I believe we have a need to get more technical, more project-based, and really significantly blow up and transform what our expectations is around education.
I think that my friends over here have done a great job of describing some of the wonderful things about a liberal arts education. You know, they've described how it can make for more engaged citizens and more productive members of society. Dale said that people are more likely to be happy and married, maybe better leaders. But what they haven't described is the proposition we're here to debate, which is, does a liberal arts degree lead to a solution to the jobs crisis? And no matter how much we really, really want to give credits to the liberal arts for making us better critical thinkers or better people or better lovers or anything else that we think liberal arts can do for us, the solution is an education that is tightly linked to what employers need. You know, as the saying goes, a hammer is a great tool, but not if you're painting the house. I applaud my colleagues for giving us all these reasons to love the liberal arts and to root for the liberal arts. They're using the wrong tool for the particular crisis that we're dealing with. I think we can all agree that a solution to the jobs crisis in which employers are rapidly hiring from a deep pool of talented and skilled employees, that would be something that would help provide, the solution would be would help people get those skills. And on that, I just want to quote from Merriam-Webster Dictionary, which specifically defines liberal arts as areas of study that are intended to give you a general knowledge rather than to develop skills needed for a profession. So not just by argument, but by definition, the liberal arts are not the solution to the jobs crisis.
Very good.
Well done. Very well done.
So by definition, you lose the debate. You've got 4 minutes to rebut that. Over you go.
So we now have Rosie the Riveter and Merriam-Webster Dictionary. I'm lucky I have the young guy with me. That's all I could say. So I still have to wonder what we mean by the jobs crisis and what we mean by the skills crisis, and how having everyone study the same thing or have everyone studying a trade is going to ameliorate that. You know, in the 2000s, 2008, I believe, Larry Katz and Claudia Golden predicted that there would be a skill shortage in certain engineering fields. In 2011 or something like that, Peter Capelli from the Wharton School wrote, "The evidence for recent grads suggests clearly that there is no overall shortage of STEM grads. Only about 1/5 of recent graduates, in fact, according to a survey with STEM degrees, got jobs that made any use of their training. Even many graduates in science, technology, engineering, and math, the so-called STEM subjects, are having a tough time getting the jobs they like. For liberal arts, the claim is different. It's not about getting the job. It's that it will enrich your life and provide lessons that extend beyond an individual job, that extend into longevity. And we have centuries of experience that provide support for the richness of that tradition."
I have to agree with my colleague, and I have to wonder what the jobs crisis really is. We've seen that quarter over quarter that we've been adding jobs to the economy, and it's very clear that, yes, while there is a strong demand for people with technical skills, that is reflected by those people getting really high wages, and means that there's more supply and people going into that due to that desire. But that does not mean that we are undervaluing the reasons that people go and get a broad liberal education to learn how to think, to learn how to understand and interact. When I hire employees, I want someone who's able to take a big, hard problem that's meaty and doesn't need to be told exactly what to do. When I talk to employers who are hiring people straight out of these coding boot camps, they say, well, they're great. They can do something that's plug and play, but they don't really understand the fundamentals of the programming language that's going on behind it. In order to be able to solve hard problems, you need to be able to think critically, to ask hard questions, to know where to go for help. And those aren't necessarily things that you need to learn in school, but they are critical for success as an adult. I think perhaps what the other side is saying is that not everyone should go to a high-priced college, and that's absolutely true. But the question of whether or not everyone should go to college is a very different question than whether or not you should get a broad liberal education. I think that in this country we believe that everyone should go to college, and I don't think that's necessarily true. Linda may disagree with me on that, but I think that fundamentally, if we're talking about a crisis, it's that we have a lot of college graduates who have a lot of debt. And those people could still be enabled and would still benefit from getting a broad liberal education. It just doesn't have to happen in a 4-year environment. The Department of Ed came out with some data about 3 weeks ago that showed that at 25% of colleges, half of those college graduates showed no increase in their earnings 10 years after graduation. And admittedly, there were a lot of really janky, like beauty schools in that list. But there were also some really top-tier schools. Bennington, for example, is the one that stood out. And I think we have to ask, if you want to be an artist, is going to college the right path? However, it is incredibly important to learn how to support yourself, how to ask the right questions, and be a successful adult. And that's what a liberal education gives you.
Thank you. So the moment of truth. We've gone from Rosa the Riveter to janky beauty schools, covered the whole range really. And so I'm going to go to you, the audience, for a vote. All those in favour of the motion that a liberal arts education is the solution to is not the solution to the jobs crisis. All those in favour of the motion. I think you may have changed their minds. Okay, all those against the motion. I think that the motion is lost, but the debate is won by the proposers of the motion, because they have moved more people across to their side. I have to say, I think everyone's a winner here. What I've been particularly delighted by, having been forced to sit through numerous presidential debates in America, is that I've had my faith in America's ability to debate at least as well as Oxford students has now been restored, and so it's a great great tribute to you all. That maybe an American liberal arts education at least gives us that. So thank you very much. I think the whole day for me has been incredibly interesting. I think I've learned a lot. I feel like there clearly is a lot of really interesting thinking and innovation going on in the higher education sector here at the moment, and I hope that you've all found benefit from what we've been talking about today, and that there's certainly the basis, I think, for a conversation that will carry on for many more years, and that we'll be able to be part of that conversation with you. So on behalf of The Economist, I'd like to thank you all for coming and invite you all to join us for a drink outside. And a big thank you to our platinum sponsors, Arizona State University, IBM and 2U. And a reminder that if you want one of our extremely coveted red Economist notebooks, please fill in the evaluation form. Not only will you get something to write in, but it will help us get the conversation even better for next year when we do this conference again. So thank you all, and cheers.